I did a team building guide for party members, but this video will be explaining calls and the different types of calls there are in the game. Quick disclaimer, these aren't all the categories of calls in the game, just the ones that I managed to come up with myself. If there are any I missed, let me know down below. First things first, how important is it to build calls? What's great about calls is that you don't need the FR and BT to build any of them, nor do you need their force enhancements or summon boards done. As long as you build weapons up to their LD and get their crystal level to 75, you can use calls of whoever you want in the game, so they're much more accessible to get. However, remember that building calls still takes resources that some players might not be able to afford, especially as a newer player. My personal advice for people still starting out, only build calls when they're absolutely necessary. Apart from that, they should be a lower priority. You generally want to focus on pulling for main units to broaden your roster and use their calls for the time being. Pulling for LDs and EXs are not cheap, and you're better off saving your hard-earned gems and tickets on FRs and BTs instead of just for calls. When you're a bit further into the game, where you can afford to splurge more on weapon tokens and you have a bunch of unbuilt LDs and EXs for units, then you can start building specifically for calls. Like making teams, choosing calls is a case-by-case thing for a fight, so I'll be explaining the main categories of calls and breaking it down from there. The three main categories I'm making are offense calls, defense calls, and enchant calls. Starting with offense, if you are using oppressive teams like those I described in my team building video, these calls are often used with them too. DPS calls are meant to deal big damage in case of emergency or for co-ops. The ones I have listed are 2 AoE calls, Cyan and Sid Highwind, and a single target call in Prish. These calls, who deal lots of HP dumps, will help chip off some more health, especially in force time with the right support units. Kina and Setzer, for example, make them absolutely disgusting. Note for DPS calls, unlike the others, these are the type of calls that require a complete LD build, so that would include giving summon boards as well as giving them armor. Next, you have freeze or 0 HP damage calls. These pretty much prevent the enemy's attacks from hurting through the call's debuffs. The two ones I like to use are Setzer and Raijin. For rushdown teams or fast parties, consider good turn manipulating calls to ensure the enemy's turns get pushed back. You can use self-manipulating calls, which give your party members more moves like Sid Reigns or Luna Freya, or enemy manipulating calls like a Meditalian, Seymour, and Quistis, who delay them even further. You have brave support calls, which you can use to make sure you deal the most damage possible, or when your main support is losing steam. Some good calls are Prish for your main DPS, Kate Sith to make the party deal critical damage, Ursula and Iroha for brave floors and retention, and Kais for his refund effect from launches. If the enemies buff themselves, you have a number of dispelling calls to pick from. Ferris, Pain, Beatrix, and Seymour are some examples of good dispellers. To prevent the enemy from attacking or hitting your team at all, there are paralysis, HP silencing calls that work great, such as Shantoto and Arciela. These two last categories are a bit more niche in regards to their intended use, but they're still worth mentioning in my opinion. You first have weapon imperil calls, which allow you to hit for weakness damage when elemental weakness is either harder or impossible to inflict. For magic imperil, you have Hope, and for melee imperil, you have Orin. Lastly, you have the multi-debuffers for when you need to fill up debuff slots, either to fulfill orb conditions or for force time requirements. The ones I like to use the most are Ferris, Sarah, and Caius. Moving to defensive calls. Like my team building video, this section will be shorter than the offense. Keep in mind, some of these calls can be used in offensive teams. They're not restricted just for defensive compositions. Remember, with choosing calls, it is mostly a case-by-case situation. For HP damage reduction calls, you have plenty of options. First, you have Rydia, though she doesn't actually reduce any HP damage. She does make the party avoid it with her indefinite length buffs. Gladio, a staple for solo teams, basically makes the call user invincible for a period of time. Warrior of Light, an OG call, lets you have Brave Shields. Hope and Porum lower the damage your team receives from any HP attacks. In case your team does get debuffed, you have both prevention and cleansing calls. Lena, with her regular call, provides the team with 4 turns each of debuff immunity, while calls like Pain and Yuna help cleanse them out. The last category is healing, which again can be used for offensive teams as well. Some great healers are Lena, Porum, and Lunafreya. The final category of calls I'd like to introduce to you guys are enchant calls. Pretty self-explanatory, these calls enchant the party to a specific element. Oftentimes it's better to have enchant be in your main party rather than a call. However, in certain situations where the pool of characters you can use is small, or if your roster just isn't big enough for it, you have options for all elements except earth. For fire enchant, you have Ignis and Lulu. For ice, you have Kurasame, Rydia for water, Garnet for both thunder and water, Fujin for wind, Ash for thunder and holy, and Zandy for dark. Those are my call breakdowns. Pick and choose which ones you want. Remember that it is a case-by-case scenario for the boss you are trying to fight. Did you guys find this guide useful? Yes or no? Please comment down below your thoughts, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!